I paid for my daughter's wedding, using up all my savings, but my son-in-law used this to humiliate me in front of 300 guests, mocking my sacrifice in his toast. I just smiled, holding back my anger. Suddenly, the groom's uncle almost choked when he heard my name and grabbed the microphone. What he said made my son-in-law cry and turned everything upside down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but I kept gripping the mug anyway. Blanche stood by my kitchen window, her designer heels clicking against the worn linoleum as she paced. Simon remained sprawled across my old recliner like he owned the place, his expensive watch catching the lamplight every time he gestured. "Dad, we need to talk about something important." Blanche's voice carried that forced sweetness she used when she wanted something big. Really big. I set down the mug, already bracing myself. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Simon leaned forward, that practiced smile spreading across his face. "Dad Hiram, we're counting on 50,000. This is our dream wedding." The words hit like a slap. $50,000! My monthly pension barely covered groceries and utilities. I felt my shoulders tense as I tried to process what they were asking. "Kids, I don't have that kind of money right now." Blanche whirled around, tears already forming in her eyes. "Dad, this is my one shot at a perfect wedding. Simon's family has connections. Important people are coming. I can't show up looking cheap." "Honey, I understand weddings are expensive, but 50,000. Other fathers would move mountains for their daughters." Simon's voice had turned cold, calculated. "My Uncle Donald always says a real man provides for his family's big moments." I watched my daughter's face crumble. She sank into the chair across from me, those crocodile tears flowing freely now. The same manipulation tactics she'd perfected as a teenager, except now she had backup. "Dad, if you really love me, you'll find a way. I've dreamed about this since I was little. Remember when I used to play dress-up in Mom's old wedding dress?" The mention of my late wife twisted something deep in my chest. Sarah would have wanted our daughter's happiness, but she also would have seen through this emotional blackmail in a heartbeat. "Blanche, you know I'd do anything for you, but I'm living on a teacher's pension. I've got maybe 30,000 in savings, and that's supposed to last me." "30,000 is a start," Simon interrupted, pulling out his phone and tapping at the screen. "You could take a loan for the rest. Banks love reliable pensioners." "Simon, I'm 65 years old. Taking on debt at my age is what loving fathers do." Blanche's voice cracked with practiced emotion. "Mom would have found a way. She always believed in making dreams come true." The room felt smaller suddenly, their expectations pressing against me from all sides. I looked at my daughter's tear-streaked face, at Simon's expectant stare, at the stack of unpaid bills sitting on my counter. I can try to figure something out." Blanche launched herself around the table, throwing her arms around my neck. "Oh, Dad, I knew you'd come through. You're the best father in the world." Simon stood straightening his jacket. "We'll need confirmation by next week. The venue requires a deposit, and the caterer won't hold our date without payment." They gathered their things quickly, Blanche chattering about flowers and photographers, while Simon checked messages on his phone. Within minutes they were gone, leaving only the lingering scent of her perfume and the weight of their expectations. I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the calculator I'd pulled from the junk drawer. 30,000 in savings, 20,000 more needed. The numbers blurred together as I tried to make sense of what I'd just agreed to. Outside, their car engine faded into the distance, and the house settled into its familiar silence. I picked up the cold coffee mug, set it down again, then reached for the phone book to look up the number for First National Bank. My hands were shaking. After they left, the house felt smaller, like the walls had absorbed their demands and shrunk inward. I spread my financial papers across the kitchen table, bank statements, pension documents, the handful of bills that never seemed to get smaller. The calculator's green display stared back at me. $29,947.63. That was everything. I pressed the numbers again, hoping they'd change. They didn't. Sleep came in fragments that night. I'd doze off in my recliner, then jolt awake with calculations running through my head. 20,000 more, at my age. The bedroom felt too big without Sarah there to talk through problems with, so I stayed in the living room, watching infomercials sell miracle solutions to people like me. By morning, I'd made my decision. First National Bank downtown looked exactly the same as it had 30 years ago when I'd opened my first checking account. The marble floors still echoed footsteps. The brass fixtures still gleamed under fluorescent lights. I clutched my folder of documents and approached the customer service desk. I need to speak with someone about a personal loan. The young woman behind the counter smiled professionally. Of course, sir. Let me get you set up with Mr. Martinez in our lending department. Carlos Martinez looked younger than Blanche, with an easy smile and a firm handshake. His office was small but organized, family photos arranged neatly beside his computer monitor. What can I help you with today, Mr. Dunn? I need to borrow $20,000. The words came out steadier than I felt. It's for my daughter's wedding. He pulled up my account history, fingers tapping across the keyboard. I see you've been with us for quite a while. Your pension deposits are very consistent. What's the timeline for this loan? As soon as possible. They need the money within the week. Carlos nodded, making notes on a pad. With your credit score and payment history, we can definitely work something out. The interest rate will be 7.9%, and we can structure payments over 5 years to keep them manageable. 5 years. I'd be 70 when this was paid off, assuming I lived that long. But Blanche's face floated in my memory, those tears that had seemed so real. What would the monthly payments be? Approximately $405 per month. More than my grocery budget, more than my utility bills, but doable if I cut back on everything else. No more dinners out, no more small luxuries. Just bare bones living until the debt was cleared. I'll take it. The paperwork took an hour. Forms, signatures, disclosures about interest rates and late fees. Carlos walked me through each page patiently, probably used to older customers who needed extra time to process financial commitments. The funds will be available in your account by Friday morning, Mr. Dunn. I thanked him and walked back to my car, feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier. Lighter because I could give Blanche what she wanted. Heavier because I'd just mortgaged my remaining years for one day of celebration. The drive home took me past the community college, where I'd taught for 3 decades. Students hurried across the campus quad, backpacks slung over shoulders, their whole lives ahead of them. I'd been their age once, full of plans and dreams that seemed achievable. 30 years of teaching, and this is what I have left to show for it. A pension that barely covers basics, and a daughter who sees me as a bank account. But maybe that was unfair. Blanche loved me, I was certain of that. Sometimes love just got tangled up with need and expectation. Sarah used to say I was too soft with our daughter, always giving in when she pushed. Maybe she'd been right. Friday morning came with an email notification. Deposit processed, $20,000. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then picked up the phone to call Blanche. Dad, perfect timing. I was just looking at flower arrangements with the wedding planner. Honey, can you and Simon come over this afternoon? I have some good news about the wedding funding. Her shriek of excitement nearly burst my eardrum. Oh my goodness, yes, we'll be there at 3. Dad, you're amazing. I hung up and looked around my modest living room. In a few hours, I'd hand over their dream and seal my own financial fate. The weight of the decision settled in my chest like indigestion, but it was too late for second thoughts now. The morning stretched ahead of me, filled with nervous energy and the need to prepare for what came next. They arrived at exactly 3 o'clock, Blanche practically bouncing on her toes as she hugged me at the door. Simon followed behind, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly pension. So? Blanche perched on the edge of my couch, eyes bright with anticipation. Don't keep us in suspense. I settled into my recliner with the bank documents folded in my lap. I secured the funding, all $50,000. Simon raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed despite himself. How did you manage that? I liquidated my savings and took out a personal loan for the remainder. I tried to keep my voice casual, as if borrowing $20,000 at 65 was perfectly normal. The money will be available for your wedding expenses. Blanche launched herself at me again, tears of joy this time instead of manipulation. Dad, I can't believe you did this. We're going to have the most incredible wedding. Simon's whole family will be so impressed. There's one condition. The words came out quieter than I intended, but they both heard me clearly enough. Simon's expression shifted, wariness creeping into his eyes. What kind of condition? I want to invite someone who means a great deal to me, someone who should be there to share this moment. Blanche pulled back from the hug, confusion replacing her earlier joy. What person? Dad, this is our wedding. We've already finalized the guest list with the caterer. I understand, but this is important to me. Just one additional person. Simon leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Listen, old man, you're paying, sure, but we decide who comes. That's how weddings work. Family and close friends only. This is family in a way. I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Someone who's been part of my life for longer than either of you have been alive. Blanche stood up, pacing toward the window. Dad, don't be so selfish. This is supposed to be about Simon and me, not about whoever this mystery person is. I'm not asking for much. Just one seat at the reception, one place at a table that's already being paid for with my money. Money we're grateful for, Simon interjected, but that doesn't buy you control you don't have. Our wedding, our rules. The coldness in his voice hit me like a slap. I looked at my daughter, hoping to find some understanding there, but her face had hardened into familiar lines of stubbornness. Dad, we can't just add random people at the last minute. Do you have any idea how much coordination goes into seating arrangements? The caterer needs final numbers. The venue has capacity limits. One person won't. It's not about one person. Blanche's voice rose to a pitch I hadn't heard since her teenage years. It's about you trying to control our special day with your money. That's manipulative and selfish. The irony of being called manipulative after their performance 3 days ago wasn't lost on me. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I watched them close ranks against me. Simon stood, straightening his expensive suit jacket. Here's what's going to happen. We'll take your generous gift and plan the wedding we want, with the guests we choose. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't come at all. Simon? Blanche looked shocked for a moment. Then her expression softened into something worse. Pity. Dad, he didn't mean that. But you have to understand, this is our day. We can't have it disrupted by your personal agenda. I sat in my recliner, looking up at these two people I'd just mortgaged my future for and saw strangers, entitled Cold Strangers Who Viewed My Sacrifice as their due and my one small request as an unreasonable demand. I'm not asking for much, I repeated quietly. You're asking for something that isn't yours to ask for. Simon grabbed his portfolio and headed for the door. Come on, Blanche. We have vendor appointments to keep. Blanche hesitated for a moment, looking between us. For a second I thought she might choose her father over her fiancé. Then she picked up her purse and followed Simon toward the door. Dad, just think about what we said, okay? Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The front door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a vault sealing shut. I sat in the sudden silence, surrounded by the echoes of their demands and the weight of their dismissal. $50,000, and I couldn't even invite one person to witness how it would be spent. The bank documents lay scattered on the floor where they'd fallen during the argument. I bent to gather them, my knees creaking with the effort. Outside, their car started and drove away, taking my money and my dignity with them. For the first time since Sarah's death, I felt truly alone. Simon stepped closer, his expensive cologne mixing with the stale air of my living room. You think your money gives you control over our special day? I remained seated, my hands gripping the arms of the recliner. I'm not asking for control, just one person who matters to me. Matters to you? Blanche's voice dripped with incredulity. What about what matters to us? To our future? Your future that I'm funding. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Simon's eyes narrowed, and I watched my daughter's face flush with anger. Funding? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dad, you're not funding anything. You're making a gift to your daughter on the most important day of her life. That's what fathers do? Exactly. Simon crossed his arms, his wedding ring catching the lamplight. This isn't a business transaction, old man. This is family. Family. The word stung more than I expected. I looked around my modest living room, the same furniture Sarah and I had bought 30 years ago. The family photos where Blanche smiled at me with genuine love. The coffee table scarred by years of family game nights. If this is family, I said quietly, then why can't I invite someone important to me? Blanche threw her hands up, pacing to the window again. Because it's not about you. Can't you see that? This is Simon's and my day. Our friends, our choices, our celebration. Paid for with my sacrifice. Sacrifice? Simon's laugh was harsh. You mean your obligation, your privilege to be part of your daughter's happiness. I felt something cold settle in my chest. These weren't the words of grateful children receiving a generous gift. These were the demands of entitled strangers who viewed my contribution as their due. I liquidated my life savings, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I took out a loan that will take years to repay, all so you could have your perfect wedding. Asking for one guest seems reasonable. Blanche spun around, tears flowing again. Now you're guilt-tripping us? Making us feel bad about accepting your gift? Gift? The word came out sharper than I intended. Blanche, this isn't a gift. This is me mortgaging my future so you can impress people who don't even know I exist. Simon moved to Blanche's side, his arm sliding protectively around her waist. Listen carefully, Dad Hiram. We appreciate your contribution, but appreciation doesn't mean surrendering our autonomy. We decide the guest list. We decide the atmosphere. We decide what kind of wedding we want. And if I can't accept that? They exchanged a look, quick, calculating, unified. When Simon turned back to me, his expression had hardened into something I'd never seen before. Then maybe you don't need to be involved at all. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I stared at my daughter, waiting for her to contradict her fiancé, to defend her father, to remember 32 years of love and sacrifice. Instead, she nodded. Dad, if you can't be happy for us without trying to control everything, maybe Simon's right. Maybe you should just step back. Step back from my own daughter's wedding, from the celebration I was funding with money I didn't have. I stood slowly, my knees protesting. I see. Simon grabbed his portfolio, his movements sharp with irritation. Good. I'm glad we understand each other. Blanche hesitated at the door, looking back with something that might have been regret. Dad, you can still come to the wedding. Just don't make it about you. Don't make it about me. The man paying $50,000 shouldn't make it about himself. They left without another word, the door closing with that same soft click that somehow sounded final. I stood in my living room, surrounded by the silence they'd left behind and the weight of their contempt. The bank documents lay scattered where they'd fallen during our argument. I bent to collect them, reading the terms and conditions I'd agreed to. $405 per month for 60 months. $20,000 plus interest, to be paid by a 70-year-old man on a fixed income. All so my daughter could tell me to step back from her life. For the first time since Sarah's funeral, I felt truly abandoned. The weeks that followed blurred together like watercolors in rain. April arrived with its usual promise of renewal, but inside our family dynamic, something had withered beyond repair. My phone rang less frequently now. When Blanche did call, it was about logistics. Caterer deposits, venue confirmations, vendor payments. Never about input, never about preferences, always about money. Dad, we need the florist deposit by Thursday. Her voice carried the brisk efficiency of a business transaction. $2,000 should cover the arrangements we selected. I didn't ask about the arrangements. After the confrontation at Petals and Stems, where my suggestion of simpler centerpieces was met with visible embarrassment, I'd learned to keep quiet. The ones you chose are fine, I'd said that day, watching the florist quote prices that made my pension look like pocket change. Blanche had exchanged a look with Simon, that familiar eye roll reserved for out-of-touch parents. Dad, your taste is just different from what we're going for. Different. The word had followed me through subsequent meetings with vendors who addressed their questions to the couple while I sat with my checkbook. A silent financial resource in an expensive suit I'd bought for the occasion. The caterer's office smelled of garlic and fresh herbs, but the aroma couldn't mask the bitter taste of being ignored. Simon spread menu options across the conference table, while Blanche pointed to selections that cost more per plate than I spent on groceries in a week. We don't want to look cheap in front of our friends, she explained to the caterer, as if I weren't sitting 3 feet away. Quality is more important than budget. Easy to say when someone else's budget was footing the bill. By mid-April, the exclusions had become systematic. Wedding planning meetings happened without me, my input replaced by cheerful summaries delivered over hurried phone calls. Everything's going perfectly, Dad. The venue coordinator loves our vision. Our vision, never ours, always theirs. I'd driven to the Oakwood Manor alone one afternoon, curious to see where my $50,000 would be spent. The ballroom was elegant. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. Beautiful and expensive, exactly what they'd wanted. The event coordinator, a polished woman named Michelle, showed me around with professional courtesy. Your daughter and her fiancé have excellent taste. This will be one of our most elegant celebrations this season. I nodded, imagining Blanche in her wedding dress, Simon in his tuxedo, surrounded by 300 guests who would never know the sacrifice behind their perfect day. Are you excited about the wedding? Michelle asked as we finished the tour. Excited wasn't the word I'd use. Resigned, maybe. Melancholy, certainly. It'll be beautiful, I said instead. The music selection meeting was my final attempt at participation. I'd arrived at the DJ's studio with a few suggestions. Songs Sarah and I had danced to, classics that held meaning for our family. Simon listened to my first suggestion for exactly 30 seconds before cutting it off. This is our generation's music, not yours. We want something that reflects who we are. Who they were, apparently, had nothing to do with where they'd come from. Late April brought the final insult disguised as consideration. Blanche called on a Tuesday evening, her voice artificially bright. Dad, we've decided to handle the remaining details ourselves. You've done so much already, and we don't want to stress you with all the little decisions. The little decisions. Like whether her father would have any voice in the wedding he was funding. We'll handle everything from here, she continued. You just worry about showing up and enjoying the celebration. Showing up, like a guest at someone else's party, which I was beginning to realize was exactly what I'd become. May arrived with a formal invitation in my mailbox, addressed to Mr. Hiram Dunn, in elegant calligraphy. No father of the bride, no special recognition, just another name on a list of 300 people invited to witness what my sacrifice had created. The invitation sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I opened it, already knowing what I'd find inside. Beautiful cardstock, expensive printing, perfect grammar, requesting my presence at their celebration. My presence, not my blessing, not my joy, just my attendance at an event where I'd be as invisible as I'd become in the planning process. I RSVP'd with a single word, attending. The morning of May 10th arrived with perfect weather, cloudless sky, gentle breeze, temperatures in the mid-70s. The kind of day Sarah would have called heaven sent for a wedding. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the same one I'd worn to parent-teacher conferences and Blanche's college graduation. The mirror reflected a man who looked older than his 65 years, weathered by months of rejection and financial stress. St. Matthew's Church sat on the corner of 5th and Main, its Gothic spires reaching toward that perfect sky. Cars already filled the parking lot when I arrived at 1:30, 30 minutes before the ceremony. I recognized none of them, expensive vehicles that matched their owners' elevated social status. Inside, the church blazed with flowers. White roses and lilies covered every surface, their fragrance mixing with the scent of polished wood and burning candles. My $2,500 for florals had bought something truly spectacular. You can sit anywhere you like, an usher told me, his arm gesturing vaguely toward the pews. I'd expected to be seated in the front row, the traditional place for the father of the bride. Instead, I found myself directed toward the back, behind clusters of guests who whispered excitedly about the upcoming ceremony. The front rows filled with people I didn't recognize, Simon's colleagues, Blanche's co-workers, friends from their shared social circle. The second row held what appeared to be extended family from Simon's side, including a distinguished older man who commanded attention and deference from those around him. Donald Reed, I realized, Simon's uncle, the successful restaurateur, who'd built a small empire of upscale establishments, the man whose approval seemed to matter more than mine. Organ music swelled through the sanctuary as the processional began. Simon took his position at the altar, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, flanked by groomsmen who looked like they'd stepped from a magazine spread. Blanche appeared at the church's entrance, and even through my hurt, I had to admit she looked radiant. Her dress flowed like water, the beadwork catching light from the stained glass windows. This was my little girl, grown into a beautiful woman, about to start her new life. She walked alone down the aisle, her bouquet of white roses steady in her hands. No father to escort her, no recognition of the man who'd raised her, loved her, sacrificed for this moment. I'd imagined walking her down that aisle 1,000 times over the years. In those dreams, she'd held my arm tightly, tears of happiness in her eyes, whispering how much she loved me as we approached the altar together. Instead, she passed my pew without acknowledgement, her focus entirely on Simon waiting at the altar. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The officiant spoke about love and commitment, about honoring parents and building new families. Blanche and Simon exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising devotion and partnership in voices that carried to every corner of the sanctuary. "I promise to honor the family that shaped you," Simon said, his voice clear and confident, "and to build a new family that reflects our love." Honor the family that shaped her. The words echoed through the church, while the man who'd actually shaped her sat invisible in the back row. Rings were exchanged, traditional words spoken, and finally the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Simon kissed Blanche as applause filled the sanctuary, camera flashes capturing their joy for posterity. Through it all, I sat silent, witness to the celebration my sacrifice had funded, surrounded by strangers who would never know the price of their beautiful afternoon. As the recessional began and the wedding party filed past, I caught Blanche's eye for just a moment. She smiled, bright, genuine, happy. But it wasn't meant for me. It was the radiant smile of a bride on her perfect day, shared with everyone and no one in particular. The guests began filing out, chattering about how lovely everything had been, how perfect the couple looked, how elegant the ceremony was. "Beautiful wedding," someone behind me said. They spared no expense. No expense indeed. I joined the crowd moving toward the church doors, where Blanche and Simon stood receiving congratulations. I could have joined the line, waited my turn to hug the bride and shake the groom's hand. Could have added my voice to the chorus of well-wishers praising their perfect day. Instead, I slipped out a side door and walked to my car, following the stream of traffic toward Oakwood Manor, where the reception would unfold. 300 guests celebrating love and new beginnings with premium food, top-shelf liquor, and live music. All of it paid for by a man who'd become a stranger at his own daughter's wedding. The drive to Oakwood Manor took 15 minutes, but felt like hours. I followed the procession of luxury cars through Columbus's historic district. My modest sedan lost among BMWs and Mercedes that belonged to people who'd never mortgaged their future for someone else's happiness. Oakwood Manor rose before us like something from a magazine spread. Limestone columns, manicured gardens, and crystal chandeliers visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Every detail screamed expense, and every expense had my signature on it. Guests streamed through the grand entrance, their laughter echoing off marble floors as they moved toward the ballroom where cocktails awaited. I entered alone, watching clusters of friends and family gravitating naturally toward Blanche and Simon, who held court near the bar like royalty-receiving subjects. "Hiram!" Simon's voice carried across the room, artificially warm. "Come meet some of our friends." I approached the group reluctantly, recognizing the trap in his tone. Simon had his arm around Blanche's waist, both of them radiant in their wedding finery, surrounded by young professionals who looked like they'd stepped from a corporate recruitment brochure. "Everyone, this is my father-in-law." Simon's smile was too bright, too practiced. "A real hero. He took out a loan for our happiness." The group turned toward me with polite interest, their champagne glasses catching the chandelier light. A woman in a designer dress smiled warmly. "Really? That's so generous." "Yes," Simon continued, his voice carrying that edge I'd learned to recognize. He's really committed to making our dreams come true, aren't you, Hiram? The expectant faces around us waited for my response. I could feel the weight of their attention, the social pressure to play along with Simon's performance. I just want my daughter to be happy, I said quietly. Happy? Simon laughed, raising his glass. An expensive taste, apparently. But that's what credit is for, right? More laughter rippled through the group. Not malicious exactly, but each chuckle felt like a small blade. These people didn't understand the cruelty disguised as humor, the months of systematic humiliation that had led to this moment. Simon, Blanche murmured, but she didn't correct him. What? I'm celebrating your father's generosity. He turned back to the group, his audience captivated. Did you know he had to liquidate his entire savings for tonight? Talk about commitment. A man in an expensive suit whistled appreciatively. Wow, that's serious dedication. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Around us the reception continued. Servers passing hors d'oeuvres that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Musicians tuning instruments for entertainment I'd never requested. Flowers arranged in designs I'd never approved. Of course, Simon continued, emboldened by his audience's attention. He tried to set conditions at first. Wanted to control our guest list just because he was paying. Really? The woman seemed genuinely surprised. What kind of conditions? Simon's eyes glittered with malicious pleasure. Oh, he had some mystery person he wanted to invite, someone important to him, as if our wedding was about anyone except Blanche and me. The group murmured understanding, nodding along with Simon's version of events. They saw a reasonable groom protecting his wedding from an interfering father-in-law, not a son-in-law humiliating the man who'd sacrificed everything for their celebration. Well, said the man in the expensive suit, it sounds like you handled it perfectly. The wedding should be about the couple. Exactly, Simon beamed, draining his champagne. Though I have to admit, having someone else foot the bill does make everything easier. More laughter, more casual cruelty disguised as appreciation. I stood there, smile frozen on my face, enduring each comment like physical blows while trying to maintain whatever dignity I had left. Through the crowd, I spotted staff preparing for dinner service, arranging place cards at tables decorated with centerpieces that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Everything beautiful, everything perfect, everything paid for with borrowed money I'd be repaying until I was 70 years old. Speaking of which, Simon said, checking his watch, my Uncle Donald should be arriving soon. Wait until you meet him. Now there's a man who knows how to celebrate family properly. His uncle, the mysterious Donald Reed, I'd heard referenced but never met. Simon's voice carried genuine warmth when he mentioned the man, a respect he'd never shown me despite everything I'd done. He raised me after my parents died, Simon explained to the group. Built a restaurant empire from nothing. Real success story. Success story, unlike the retired teacher standing before them apparently. The group began dispersing as dinner preparations intensified, but Simon's words lingered in the air like smoke. I watched him move through the crowd, confident and cruel, anticipating his uncle's arrival while dismissing the man who'd made his perfect evening possible. Around me, 300 guests enjoyed cocktails and conversation, preparing for an elegant dinner and evening of celebration. None of them knew the true cost of their champagne and caviar, but perhaps that was about to change. 2 hours into the reception, the atmosphere had settled into elegant sophistication. Guests moved between cocktails and conversation, their voices creating a pleasant buzz beneath the classical music I'd paid for but never chosen. Simon checked his watch repeatedly, his excitement building toward something I didn't yet understand. He should be here any minute, he told Blanche, straightening his bow tie for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. She squeezed his arm reassuringly. Uncle Don will love everything. How could he not? I stood near the edge of the ballroom, nursing a whiskey I couldn't really afford, and watching the social dynamics I'd funded but wasn't part of. The irony wasn't lost on me, invisible at my own expense. Then the room's energy shifted. A distinguished man appeared in the doorway, and conversations paused as heads turned toward him. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Silver hair perfectly styled, expensive suit that fit like it was made for him, eyes that seemed to catalog everything with sharp intelligence. Donald Reed had arrived. Simon practically vibrated with excitement, abandoning our conversation mid-sentence to hurry toward his uncle. I watched the reunion. Warm embraces, genuine affection, the kind of familial bond I'd once shared with Blanche before money and manipulation poisoned it. "Everyone," Simon's voice carried across the ballroom, "I want you to meet my Uncle Donald, the man who made me who I am." The crowd pressed closer, drawn by celebrity magnetism. Donald accepted the attention graciously, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with the ease of someone comfortable in social situations. "Simon, you've outdone yourself," Donald said, surveying the ballroom with appreciation. "This is magnificent." His voice carried authority earned through decades of business success. I found myself studying him from across the room, trying to understand what made this man so important to my son-in-law. "Uncle Don, you're going to love meeting everyone," Simon beamed. "This is our dream wedding." "Dreams have a way of coming true when you work hard enough for them," Donald replied, though his eyes continued scanning the room with businessman's attention to detail. A woman near me whispered to her companion, "That's Donald Reed. He owns 5 restaurants in the city. Worth millions." Worth millions. No wonder Simon showed him the respect he'd never offered me. The crowd naturally organized itself around Donald, guests eager to introduce themselves to someone of his stature. He handled each interaction with practiced charm, asking thoughtful questions and remembering names with impressive facility. "Mr. Reed," gushed a young woman, "we've heard so much about you. What an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine," Donald replied smoothly. "Any friend of Simon and Blanche is family to me." Family. The word carried weight when he said it, genuine meaning behind the social pleasantry. I watched him interact with my daughter, polite, respectful, treating her with the dignity I'd once expected from her husband. Simon hovered nearby, basking in reflected glory. His uncle's presence transformed him from smug groom to eager nephew, desperate to prove himself worthy of such an impressive relative. "Uncle Don," Simon said, guiding him toward the center of the room, "let me tell you about some of the people here tonight. You'll appreciate this." I found myself moving closer, drawn despite myself to observe this family dynamic that clearly meant everything to Simon. Whatever Donald Reed represented to my son-in-law was powerful enough to make him seek approval he'd never needed from me. Donald's eyes swept across the reception, taking in details with businessman's precision. The expensive floral arrangements, the premium bar service, the elegant table settings, everything my credit cards had made possible. "This must have cost a fortune," he observed quietly to Simon. "Every penny worth it," Simon replied. "When you love someone, you spare no expense." No expense, as if he'd paid for any of it himself. I watched this interaction from my peripheral position, noting how Simon's entire demeanor changed in his uncle's presence. Gone was the casual cruelty he'd shown me, replaced by almost childlike eagerness for approval. "You've built something beautiful here," Donald continued, his hand on Simon's shoulder. "Your parents would be proud." The mention of Simon's deceased parents brought visible emotion to my son-in-law's face. Whatever tragedy had brought these two together clearly created bonds deeper than I'd realized. As the dinner hour approached, guests began moving toward their assigned tables. I found my place card at a table near the back, close enough to observe, far enough away to be forgotten. The seating arrangement told its own story about my position in this family hierarchy. Donald naturally sat at the head table with the bride and groom, holding court among the most important guests. From my distant table, I could see Simon's animated conversation, his gestures becoming more expansive as he told stories I couldn't hear but could imagine. The man who'd raised him commanded respect and attention Simon had never shown me. Whatever happened next would flow from that fundamental difference in how we were valued, and something told me the evening was about to become much more interesting. An hour after Donald's arrival, Simon had transformed into someone I barely recognized. Gone was the calculated coldness he'd shown me for months, replaced by animated energy as he basked in his uncle's approval. The combination proved dangerous for everyone involved. "Uncle Don," Simon said, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear, "you know what's funny about tonight?" Donald was cutting into his filet mignon, the most expensive option on the menu I'd approved sight unseen. "What's that?" My father-in-law thinks he can set conditions just because he's footing the bill. Several guests at nearby tables turned toward the conversation, drawn by Simon's theatrical tone. I felt my stomach clench as I recognized the familiar setup for another round of public humiliation. Donald paused mid-chew. Conditions? Oh, yes, Simon's voice carried across the ballroom with disturbing enthusiasm. Poor Hiram over there, he gestured toward my distant table, wanted to control our guest list. Can you imagine? I gripped my whiskey glass tighter, watching Donald's expression shift to mild interest. He followed Simon's gesture, his eyes finding me for the first time that evening. He actually had the nerve to demand we invite some mystery person, Simon continued, warming to his theme. Someone important to him, as if our wedding was about anyone except Blanche and me. Laughter rippled from the surrounding tables. Guests who'd been enjoying their expensive dinners now had entertainment to go with their meals, courtesy of my humiliation. That does seem inappropriate, someone commented from a neighboring table. Right? Simon beamed at the validation. I told him, this is our day, our celebration, our choices. Just because you're paying doesn't mean you get to play puppet master. More laughter, more casual cruelty disguised as reasonable boundary setting. I sat frozen in my chair, watching my son-in-law perform for his beloved uncle, using my pain as material. Donald's expression had grown thoughtful, his businessman's instincts apparently picking up on something in the dynamic. And he accepted that? Eventually, Simon's confidence was building with each laugh, each nod of approval from his audience. Though I have to admit it took some convincing. Poor man had to take out a loan for all this luxury you see around us. He swept his arm dramatically, encompassing the ballroom's elegance, the crystal, the flowers, the 5-course meal being served by professional waitstaff. Alone? Donald's voice carried a note I couldn't identify. Oh yes, Hiram Dunn had to liquidate his entire savings and borrow $20,000 just to afford his daughter's happiness. Simon's voice rang with cruel amusement. Talk about financial commitment. The name hit the air like a physical force. I watched Donald's face change, subtle but unmistakable shift from mild interest to sharp attention. His fork remained suspended halfway to his mouth as he processed what he'd just heard. What did you say his name was? Donald's voice had gone quiet, controlled. Simon, oblivious to the change in his uncle's demeanor, continued his performance. Hiram Dunn, sweet old guy, really, just completely out of his depth with modern wedding expenses, had to explain to him several times that this isn't the 1980s. Quality celebrations require serious investment. The laughter around us began to feel forced, uncomfortable. Some guests were starting to recognize the cruelty in Simon's words, the inappropriateness of mocking someone who'd sacrificed so much. But Simon, intoxicated by what he interpreted as his uncle's attention, pressed on. The best part is he still thinks he should have a say in how we spend his money. Had to set him straight about who makes the decisions in this family. Donald had gone completely still. His eyes remained fixed on Simon, but something behind them had changed fundamentally. The warmth, the pride, the familial affection, all of it transforming into something much colder. Hiram Dunn, Donald repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. That's right, Simon raised his champagne glass in a mock toast. Here's to fathers-in-law who know their place, writing checks and staying quiet. The surrounding tables erupted in uncomfortable laughter, but I noticed several guests exchanging glances, their discomfort becoming visible. Even Blanche looked uncertain, perhaps sensing that Simon had crossed a line she hadn't quite identified. Donald set down his fork with deliberate precision. His eyes found mine across the crowded ballroom, and for a moment time seemed suspended. Recognition flickered in his expression, not just of my name, but of something deeper, more significant, something that was about to change everything. As the evening settled into the reception's final phase, servers cleared dessert plates, while guests lingered over coffee and after-dinner drinks. The master of ceremonies tapped his champagne glass, calling for attention across the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now hear from the groom. Simon practically bounced to his feet, his face flushed with wine and the intoxication of his uncle's presence. He moved toward the microphone with the confidence of a man who believed he commanded the room, unaware that his next words would destroy everything he thought he understood about himself. Thank you, everyone, His voice boomed through the sound system. "What an incredible evening we've shared together." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I sat at my distant table, bracing myself for whatever fresh humiliation he had planned. Donald remained at the head table, his champagne glass untouched, his eyes fixed on his nephew with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I want to thank everyone who made this magical day possible," Simon continued, his voice carrying that familiar edge of performance. "My beautiful bride, our wonderful friends, and especially—" He paused dramatically, surveying the room like a comedian timing his punchline. "Especially my father-in-law, who showed such dedication to our happiness." A few guests chuckled uncertainly. Simon's smile widened, encouraged by the response. "Seriously, folks, let me tell you about commitment." His voice grew stronger, more theatrical. How many fathers would liquidate their entire life savings for their daughter's wedding? More laughter, though I noticed several guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "But that's not all." Simon raised his champagne glass higher. "When that wasn't enough, this dedicated man took out a personal loan at 65 years old." The laughter was becoming forced now, guests beginning to recognize the cruelty beneath the supposed gratitude. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's raise our glasses to Hiram Dunn, the man who mortgaged his golden years for our golden day." I felt the familiar burn of public humiliation, but something had changed in me during these months of systematic degradation. The shame felt distant now, replaced by a cold clarity about who Simon really was. "And the best part," Simon continued, his voice rising with cruel enthusiasm, "is how generous he was about our little disagreements. He wanted to control our guest list, can you believe it? As if paying for something gives you a say in how it's used." The ballroom had grown quieter. Even those who'd laughed earlier seemed uncomfortable with this level of public mockery. "But don't worry about old Hiram," Simon's voice carried across the silent room. "After tonight, Blanche and I promise we'll never have to live so modestly as he does. We'll make sure his sacrifice really pays off for us." That's when it happened. Donald Reed, who'd been sitting motionless through Simon's performance, suddenly lurched forward. His champagne glass hit the table with a sharp crack, the contents spilling across the white tablecloth like blood. "Stop!" The word exploded from him with such force that Simon actually staggered backward. "Give me that microphone!" The ballroom fell into complete silence. 300 guests turned to stare at the distinguished businessman who just interrupted the groom's toast with shocking intensity. Simon stood frozen at the microphone, confusion replacing his cruel confidence. "Uncle Don, what's—" "The microphone, Simon." Donald's voice carried absolute authority. "Now." Simon's hand trembled as he extended the microphone toward his uncle. The confidence that had carried him through months of tormenting me evaporated in the face of Donald's obvious fury. Donald rose from his chair with deliberate precision, his movements commanding the attention of every person in the room. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of moral authority that comes from a lifetime of earned respect. "There's something you all need to know." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Waitstaff stopped clearing tables. Guests held their breath. Even the musicians had gone quiet, sensing that something profound was about to unfold. Donald's eyes found mine across the crowded room, and for the first time all evening I saw something that looked like recognition, something that looked like respect, something that was about to change everything. Donald held the microphone with steady hands, but I could see the emotion barely contained beneath his composed exterior. The ballroom remained frozen in anticipation, 300 guests sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. 32 years ago, Donald began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system, there was a terrible house fire on Maple Street in this very city. A few older guests nodded, remembering. I felt my stomach clench as memories I'd tried to forget came flooding back. The smell of smoke, the sound of sirens, a child's terrified crying. "A young father and mother died in that blaze," Donald continued, his eyes never leaving Simon's face. "They left behind a 2-year-old son, trapped on the second floor while flames consumed the staircase below." Simon's face had gone pale. Blanche reached for his hand, but he seemed frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. The fire department hadn't arrived yet. Neighbors stood watching helplessly as the house burned, knowing a child was inside but unable to reach him. Donald's voice grew stronger, more passionate, but one man, a complete stranger, heard that little boy's cries and didn't hesitate. My hands were shaking now. I could see that burning house as clearly as if it were yesterday. The orange flames licking at broken windows, the desperate sound of a child's voice calling for help that wasn't coming fast enough. This stranger ran into that burning building without thinking about his own safety. He fought through smoke and flames, found that terrified child, and carried him to safety just minutes before the roof collapsed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people turned to look at me, beginning to understand where this story was heading. That stranger suffered severe burns on his hands and arms. Donald continued, his voice thick with emotion. He spent 3 days in the hospital. When he was discharged, he asked only that the child be placed with family who would love him. Simon was staring at his uncle now, recognition dawning in his eyes like a terrible sunrise. That 2-year-old boy grew up to become a successful man, surrounded by people who cared about him, never knowing the name of the hero who saved his life. Donald's voice broke slightly. That child was you, Simon. The words hit the ballroom like a physical force. Gasps echoed from multiple tables. Simon's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. "And that hero," Donald said, his eyes finding mine again across the room. "The man who ran into a burning building to save a stranger's child, who asked for nothing in return, who spent 32 years never mentioning his courage, is Hiram Dunn." The silence that followed was deafening. Simon stood frozen at his table, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror. Blanche had covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. I sat in my chair, feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes, remembering that night when I'd simply done what anyone would do, what I'd hoped someone would do if my own child were in danger. "I had no idea," I said quietly, but the microphone picked up my words. "I never knew that little boy was you, Simon." Simon's legs gave out. He collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with what I realized were sobs. 32 years, Donald continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of moral judgment. 32 years this man has carried the scars of saving your life. And tonight, I've watched you mock him, humiliate him, treat him like a burden. The very man who gave you every breath you've taken since you were 2 years old. The crowd had begun to stir, whispers growing louder as the full implications sank in. The expensive reception funded by a hero's sacrifice. The cruel jokes aimed at the man who'd risked everything for a stranger's child. "Every dollar this man spent on your wedding," Donald said, his voice rising, "every sacrifice he made, every humiliation he endured, he did it for the same reason he ran into that burning building 32 years ago. Because that's who he is, a man who puts others before himself, even when they don't deserve it." Simon looked up from his hands, his face streaked with tears, his eyes finding mine across the ballroom. In that moment, I saw not the cruel man who'd tormented me for months, but the frightened child I'd carried from that burning house so long ago. And despite everything he'd put me through, my heart broke for him. Simon rose from his chair on unsteady legs, his face transformed by the weight of recognition. The cruel confidence that had defined him all evening was gone, replaced by something raw and broken and real. He walked toward me slowly, each step carrying the burden of months of cruelty he was finally beginning to understand. The 300 guests watched in absolute silence as he approached my table. "Hiram!" His voice cracked as he spoke my name. Please forgive me." I stood to meet him, this man I'd saved as a child and who'd tormented me as an adult, seeing now how the scared little boy still lived somewhere inside the successful businessman. "You didn't know, son," I said quietly. "None of us knew the connection. But I should have known better anyway." Simon's words came in a rush, tears streaming down his face. "You gave me everything. The money, your savings, your dignity, and I threw it back in your face. I treated you like you were nothing when he was everything." Donald's voice carried from the microphone. "The reason you're alive to stand here tonight." Simon dropped to his knees in front of me, this proud man humbling himself before the entire gathering. I don't know how to make this right. I don't know how to take back the things I said, the way I treated you. I reached down and helped him to his feet, feeling the eyes of everyone in the ballroom watching this moment of grace and redemption. You stand up, I said simply. You be better than you were. That's how you make it right. Simon nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve, then turned to face the crowd. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of the arrogance that had characterized his earlier toast. I need that microphone back, he said to his uncle. Donald handed it over without a word, pride and pain mixing in his expression as he watched his nephew begin the long journey toward becoming the man he'd hoped to raise. Simon took the microphone with shaking hands. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice was rough with emotion, everything I said earlier tonight was wrong. Worse than wrong. It was cruel and ungrateful and completely backwards. He turned to look at me, his eyes still bright with tears. This man, Hiram Dunn, is not just the father of my beautiful wife. He's not just the generous soul who funded this incredible celebration you see around you. Simon's voice grew stronger as he spoke, finding his footing in this new reality. He's the reason I'm standing here tonight at all. 32 years ago, when I was just a baby, he risked his life to save mine. He ran into a burning building and pulled me to safety, carrying burns and scars he bears to this day. Murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd. Several guests had begun to applaud, but Simon held up his hand. And how did I repay this heroism? By spending months treating him like he was beneath me, by mocking his sacrifice, by humiliating him publicly, by making him feel small and unwanted at his own daughter's wedding. His voice broke again, but he pressed on. The man who saved my life had to take out a loan to pay for my dream wedding, and I thanked him by treating him like a joke. Simon turned toward me again, his voice carrying across the ballroom with new strength. But that ends tonight, right here, right now. He raised his champagne glass, which someone had quietly refilled during the revelation. Ladies and gentlemen, raise your glasses. Not to me, not to my new wife, not to our happiness. 300 guests lifted their glasses as one, the crystal catching the chandelier, light like stars. Raise your glasses to Hiram Dunn. Simon's voice rang with genuine emotion. The man who gave me life, not once, but twice. Once when he pulled me from that burning house, and again tonight when he showed me what true grace looks like by forgiving someone who didn't deserve it. To Hiram! The cry rose from every corner of the ballroom, thunderous applause following as 300 guests rose to their feet in recognition of heroism that had taken 3 decades to be properly acknowledged. I stood there, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal, surrounded by the same people who'd watched my humiliation now celebrating my vindication. But the real gift wasn't their applause. It was seeing my daughter's face, shining with new understanding and pride in her father. Blanche made her way through the crowd to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm so proud of you. I love you." As I held my daughter close, surrounded by the celebration my sacrifice had created, but finally invited to truly enjoy, I realized that sometimes the longest roads lead to the most meaningful destinations. The last toast of the evening belonged to truth, justice, and the quiet power of doing what's right, even when no one is watching, even when it costs everything, even when it takes 32 years to be recognized. But it's always worth the wait. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.